Hello, my name is Tyler Heiss, and I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit about the career construction theory with me. As an ethical disclaimer, this presentation takes place as a requirement of the Counseling 832 class, Lifestyle and Career Development at Fort Hays State University. This presentation is intended for educational use only. I don't want to spend a lot of time with my table of contents here, but as we can see, this presentation is going to be broken up into four major parts. Starting with the background of the career construction theory, we will then move into a more in-depth look at the career construction theory from Savickas himself. Then we will go into some applications of the career construction theory, and finally conclude with a couple of conclusory slides to wrap things up here. In an attempt to better understand where we're coming from with the career construction theory proposed by Savickas in 2002, I would first like to take us back a little bit in history so that we can understand what led to the development of this theory from Savickas. Mark Savickas was born in the United States around 1947, shortly after the end of World War II. He got his PhD at Kent State University and became a prominent figure in vocational psychology and career counseling through his work in the Behavioral Sciences Department at Northeast Ohio State University as a professor. Starting with Super's lifetime of work, the developmental theory he created expanded upon the static traits that were used in Parsons' trait and factor model, which had been a dominant theory of the time. Sometime later, constructivism enters the scene with the rise of postmodern philosophies that challenge things like objective truths, especially within the social sciences. Not long after, person and environment perspectives, which I have amusingly acronymed PI, gained traction as environmental influences were increasingly considered. Now, with this, I've laid out sort of the landscape of the time, hopefully drawing some attention to major events in history that influenced career choices, namely wars and cultural revolutions. It becomes easier to see, right, where Savickas' work and perspectives are stemming from. Now, having looked at what led up to Savickas' career construction theory historically, I want to spend a little bit of time with the theoretical perspectives that fueled his work. Starting with the person and environment perspective, which I may call the PI perspective for brevity, this theoretical orientation builds on the work of Bronfenbrenner's 1979 systems model. Bronfenbrenner suggested that individuals experience life in several systems, which are shown in the visual aid presented on this slide here. These systems encompass the totality of interactions an individual may have in their life, while also working to answer the who and where of these interactions. This perspective challenges the notion that all of a client's problems exist from within the client, and instead highlights how the client's systems may be influencing them. The next theoretical orientation that we must understand is constructivism. Constructivist perspectives departed from logical positivism, which was commonplace in the physical sciences, wherein the goal of these sciences was to learn in ways that were empirical and logically based. Instead, the social sciences increasingly adopted constructivist views, wherein it was understood that an individual constructs their own reality through learning and experiences, uh, and a variety of things which the person can then use to define themselves. For example, here in Kansas, we may see that if a person grows up in a small, rural farming community, these experiences could go on to explain how this person defines themselves, therefore shaping the reality that they live in. Sources such as Brown, Brooks, and Associates, 1996, work suggest four key propositions that help to better understand this theoretical approach. Notion 1 proposes that it is near impossible to separate people from their environments, or meaning from the things that meanings have been associated to. For example, a hammer will always be understood as a tool. Notion 2 maintains that there are no absolutes, which eliminates the ability for human experiences to be reduced to mere laws or principles. Notion 3 suggests that human behavior must be understood in the context through which it happened. Examples of this for career counselors may include making attempts to understand the context that led up to a client's decision to quit their job or apply for a promotion, for example. Lastly, Notion 4 is the tenet that maintains that we, as people, define ourselves through our experiences, such that our environments and experiences within these environments may go on to shape the reality that we live by, such as the farmer example that I used earlier. This fourth tenet is the one that Savickas really seemed to stick to later in his work, but I might be getting ahead of myself a bit by saying that. The next theoretical foundation that Savickas was working off of includes the developmental work done by Donald Super, published in 1990. Super's 5 big stages included growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance or management, and disengagement. Growth involves a person's developing capacities and involves becoming concerned with their future as a worker, increasing the control they have over their vocational activities, forming conceptions about how to make well-informed choices on their education and vocations, and establishing and developing the confidence needed to act on their desired career choices, the 4 C's. Exploration involves a person discovering their identity as a worker through narrowing the selection of vocational opportunities that they are really interested in. Super identified, and Savickas endorsed, 3 main steps here that include crystallization, where a person locks down some concrete aspects of their identity in a more stable way, specification, wherein an individual connects the dots between who they are and how this self-identified identity can meaningfully connect with jobs they may be interested in, and actualization, which involves a person really going out and trying to obtain relevant vocational experience in the areas they believe align closest with their interests and goals, whether through internships and other small experiences, full-time jobs, or even just starting their own business. Establishment involves a person not only finding a vocational role, but really settling down into one. In this stage of vocational development, a person is going to do some serious self-discovery to figure out how their identity as a worker aligns with the work they are doing. As they do this, they will also discern real from imagined barriers that may exist on their way to reaching their vocational goals. And they will adopt a growth-focused mindset to bring attention to the positive elements of their work, which may be easy to push aside or ignore as one initially battles the challenges associated with the process of change that exist when taking on a new job. Now, maintenance or management. This involves a person bringing awareness to their current vocational activities within the context of their relative position in life. Now, for example, the elderly may not be able to stay in a job long enough to climb the corporate ladder, right? Or youth may lack the experience required to do some jobs, etc. During this stage, one may redefine themselves or preserve their previously held vocational identity with the purpose of really finding contentment in their work or where they hope their work will take them. Finally, disengagement. This then involves an individual preparing to release control over the vocational responsibilities they once had and, importantly, adapt to a new lifestyle and identity as a retiree. Now, having explained some of the theories that Savickas worked off of, we can better understand how Savickas's career construction theory is a developmental and a person and environment theory, all while being grounded in the perspectives of the constructivist theory. As a developmental theory, Savickas highlights how vocational exploration and development is a continuous process that an individual will constantly be revisiting throughout their lives. As a person and environment theory, Savickas demonstrates the importance of taking a broader look at systems in the client's life, while also prioritizing an investigation of how the client fits in their work environment, as well as how their work environment aligns with their lifestyle, identity, and life structure or position. And now, in alignment with constructivist perspectives, Savickas incorporates a necessary understanding of how an individual environment shapes them as well, such that the constructs of an individual's life change as their life does, which is to say, continuously, while also empowering clients to have an impact in the systems that affect them, such that not only do the environments shape the client, but that the client gains the autonomy to make changes in their systems too. Above and beyond the theoretical foundation that Savickas' work is established in, when proposing his theory in 2002, Savickas identified 16 propositions. 3 of the most important include developmental contextualism, which aims to discover one's core roles, which can be done by investigating the context of one's vocational experiences. That is, how their vocational development has been shaped and reshaped by the bidirectional relationship between a client and their roles in their work. Next is the development of one's vocational self-concept. One's vocational self-concept is developed through a myriad of sources, such as the individual differences in vocational characteristics that shape one's perception of work roles, the content associated with certain work roles, and more. Importantly, Savickas emphasized that one's vocational self-concept is never fully complete, and while it is influenced by many factors, it is continuously developing through one's life. The third one here is vocational developmental tasks. The vocational developmental tasks are the same as the ones mentioned only a couple of slides ago, which include growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance, and disengagement. The Savickas endorsed from Donald Zuber's work, so I will refer to my previous slide here rather than repeating this information. But worthy to note is that people will progress through these stages at different paces, and the rate or pace that someone progresses through these stages should not be considered as successes or failures. It can take a long time to figure out what we want to do in life, and that should be interpreted non-judgmentally by psychological practitioners and clients alike. Now in this slide, I'm going to expand a bit upon the notion of one's self-concept, as Savickas did have quite a bit to say about this matter. Savickas believed that one's self-concept began in childhood, but was not fully realized until an individual reached maturity, which I have worded intentionally to reflect that this stage is not age-dependent, but instead is reflective of the personal characteristics and attributes of a given client. This self-concept development can be realized from ambiguous and abstract terminology into something a little bit more tangible through dimensions and metadimensions, wherein both refer to personal characteristics, but dimensions refer to items oriented at the content of careers and career choices, whereas metadimensions are focused on processes, such as the specific personal attributes that govern a person's process of choosing another career, for example. As a clinical psychology student, I often get caught up in semantics, and while reviewing Savickas' theory, these terms did stand out to me. It is important, as practitioners, to be able to differentiate terms such as these, similar to how we once had to differentiate there, and there. Humor aside, these terms also represent important areas for career counselors to tune into when working with clients. Career maturity looks at the degree of similarity that a client's vocational behavior has when compared to same-age peers and within the context of social expectations. Super identifies 6 items to look for concerning career maturity, which are on the slide here for you to read. Career maturity can be measured using the Career Maturity Inventory. Career adaptability. By contrast, this investigates one's resilience in regard to their ability to cope with current and anticipated vocational tasks, risks, transitions, and challenges. The relevance of career adaptability is that in a volatile and sometimes nonlinear job market, a person's career resilience is as practical of a concept, if not more so, than their vocational behaviors compared to social expectations. For example, if a 40-year-old woman is laid off from her job and she now has to learn new skills for a new job, her vocational knowledge and planning skills are not likely to be in question, as it could be reasonably assumed that she has career maturity. But whether or not she possesses the career adaptability, that is, resilience, to bounce back from this setback could be the more important element to tune into. Now this slide is included to support the overall model of career construction, although I don't want to linger here too long, as this is the part of the presentation where people generally fall asleep on me. So, Hackett and Lent 1992 and Ozipow and Fitzgerald 1996 suggest that the general model is empirically supported by the data gathered on it. Literature on the developmental segment of career construction is also empirically supported as well, stemming from Super's robust background of literature in career counseling. And the data gathered on Savickas' self-concept is also generally congruent with his theory. While these are all good, it is important to mention that Savickas himself noted that much more research is needed across various aspects of his theory, and that the theory itself, as it stands, is limited by the disproportionately white male sample of participants that the data was gathered through, particularly through Donald Super's work. When considering the multicultural considerations of this theory, it is important to note that the theory was published in the early 2000s, and it does draw on information that was collected from the mid to late 1900s. That being said, some of the cultural advantages of the career construction theory include a collectivist perspective and foundation, which allows clients from many cultures to find their meaning, rather than being compared to normed samples which may or may not represent them. The third tenet of constructivism also supports that behavior can only be understood in its context, which invites counselors to consider the culture of a client as it relates to their experiences. With a focus on narratives and telling one's life story, this theory also increases accessibility for collectivist and oral tradition cultures that favor talking over taking standardized tests. The ecological perspective of career construction also allows clients to feel validated in their struggles against systemic issues they may be facing. And the PI model keeps clients accountable for their growth and development by removing the occurrence of victim blaming, which may become a barrier in treatment if clients fixate on the notion that systemic barriers will always be holding them back or preventing them from reaching their goals. And it does this by asking them about external barriers, right? But also focusing on the client's internal constructs. Now, worth noting are also some of the limitations and cautions of this theory, which include the original data from Super's developmental theories being rooted in a sample of mostly white men, which of course limits the generalizability of this data outside of this demographic. The narrative format of these services also requires clients to recall information about themselves, which may not be the most appropriate option for clients who have diagnosed memory impairments, traumatic brain injuries, language barriers, speech impediments, those whose first language is not the same as their counselors, and other such similar situations. There also exists a risk of over-pathologizing clients who are restricted from systemic issues due to the theory's focus on adaptability and growth within the context of vocational achievement. And bundling the last 2 points together here, the theory fails to address relevant gender differences and how these differences influence and shape vocational roles and aspirations, as well as failing to mention the significance of discerning between collectivist and individualistic cultural values in order to help counselors avoid imposing their values on clients. While I am not formally trained on these instruments, I have included some of the recommended assessments for the aforementioned areas of career counseling. Career concerns can be measured using the ACCI, which is going to investigate concerns around the 5 developmental stages that I've outlined earlier in this presentation, while to a lesser degree, investigating life space, career adaptability, vocational self-concept, career themes, and vocational identity. Career maturity and adaptability are going to be measured using the CMI and CDI, which I mentioned earlier in this distinguishing between adaptability and maturity. The CMI is going to be useful for high school students, and the CDI is going to be useful for college students, although I would argue that this could also apply to emerging adults as well. The self-concept can be measured through adjective checklists, card sorts, the repertory grid technique, and autobiographical career theme interviews. By implementing all of these measures, a clinician can gather a cross-sectional view of the client's self-concept, as well as a relatively longitudinal view of their career themes. Vocational identity can be measured using the SDS or SII, wherein the client's interests can be matched with occupations that align with or share similarities with these interests. Although having some assessments can be nice and even ideal in some instances, an assessment will not be able to provide the depth of information that an interview with a trained practitioner can. As such, I've gathered a brief series of questions that a career counselor may want to include in an interview with a client. Some of these questions I quickly grabbed from the internet, while others I have personal experience using in my own work. For a client's life story and narrative, some questions could include: will you tell me about your career story, from the earliest memories of what you wanted to be to where you are today? Another could be: who did you admire the most as a child, and what did you admire about them? Still another could include: what is your favorite book, or movie, or story, and what does the main character's journey mean for you? For clients' self-concept and identity, some questions could include: using only about 3 to 5 words, will you please describe yourself as a worker? Yet another could be: when you imagine the ideal work environment, what does it look like, and what are you doing in it? Still another could be: what pieces of your work history feel the most like you, and which feel the least like you? Now, for a client's career concerns or stage, some questions could include: what concerns you the most about your work life right now? Another could be: what would feel like success to you in your career over the next 5 years? And another could be: are there any barriers that you think are holding you back right now? And would you say that these barriers are really holding you back? Or are they more so worries of things that could hold you back? Now, for a client's adaptability, some questions could include: when your career plans haven't gone as you planned for them to in the past, how did you respond to it? And what resources did you utilize during that time? And another could be: what are some skills or bits of knowledge that you feel you need to develop to make reaching your goals a little easier? Now, as a part of this presentation, I should answer the question of whether or not I would personally use this theory. And the answer, overall, is yes. While I am open to learning about and utilizing new theories that may be able to better help my clients, I believe that there is a great deal of utility in this approach. The career construction theory resonates with me because of its client-centered approach that recognizes the human being in front of me that is seeking help, rather than reducing a person to being a client with a certain combination of traits that should fit into a certain career path like puzzle pieces. People are simply more complicated creatures than that, and this theory's focus on letting the client tell their story and experiences really allows that sentiment to shine, while also offering them a space to be heard, understood, and helped in a way that makes a meaningful difference for them. Another particularly interesting detail that I gathered was in the pie perspective that was incorporated into this theory, such that clients who are facing systemic barriers are encouraged not to define themselves by these systemic barriers that they may be facing, and therefore get caught up in a victim mindset that blames external sources for all of their experienced struggles, but one that focuses inwardly on the client's internal constructs, too. In this way and others, I have found this theory to be fairly straightforward and practical in helping clients achieve their goals and vocational ambitions. When reflecting on my own experiences, and where I hope that my experiences will go in the future through my own vocational growth and development, I've also considered how career construction theory will help me to assist the children at Camber, my local children's mental health hospital. As they become adults and search for employment opportunities, the youth that I work with may not have crystallized ideas about what they want to do in the future. I could help them to teach some of the fundamental notions that a teenager may need to know as they enter the workforce, while hopefully preparing them to discover for themselves what it is that they really want to spend their lives doing. Drawing on my experiences at the Smoky Hill Foundation for Chemical Dependency, I have also been given a chance to work with individuals experiencing a variety of addictions. Many of these individuals were also dealing with legal consequences associated with their substance use. These individuals frequently struggled to find fulfilling employment due to the restrictions that were placed on them due to their legal involvement. So, being able to use this theory to help populations such as these discover vocational opportunities that are still available to them to meet their personal goals and ambitions has been insightful. Beginning in August of 2026, I have also accepted a position as a case manager in a local school district, And within my work at this setting, I believe that many of the same lessons that I could utilize at Cambridge could also be utilized here, too. Such that by really listening to these students and their goals and aspirations, I can help connect them with the skills and knowledge they need to pursue vocational experiences that will prepare them for the lives they are building. Also, as a long-term goal, I plan to stay within rural areas, wherein vocational opportunities can and often are scarce, depending on the interests of the client. In these settings, career construction theory can help me to understand the needs of my client so that I can help them to discover the available local vocational opportunities they may be interested in if they want to stay local, or alternatively, helping to connect them with the knowledge and resources they may want if they are hoping to move to a different area, maybe even a more populated one. Now, in a fun attempt to wrap up this presentation, I'd like to review this presentation in the form of a rating scale. While I am a graduate student who has some experience with assessment and theories, it should be noted that these ratings, while educationally informed, are subjective measures of this theory from my perspective. The theoretical depth, the utility of this theory across an individual's lifespan, and the utility of this theory overall all receive 5 out of 5 stars, as I believe the theory addresses these areas well, and honestly, I couldn't name many ways that I would like to see these areas improved upon. Now, the multicultural sensitivity and flexibility of this theory receives a 4 out of 5 stars. Because this theory is rooted in a disproportionately white male demographic, and it is relatively pretty outdated by today's standards, I'm going to have to knock a star off here. However, there are also a host of cultural considerations and sensitivities that are just inherent to the theory, which, in my opinion, do go a long way in minimizing the harm of the limitations that this theory has overall. Now, the training requirements involved or assumed for this theory is the area where I think this theory is going to fall the shortest for me. As as conducting some of the counseling techniques that are required, or at least implied to be required, for this theory are going to involve a considerable amount of training, experience, and expertise that go beyond what a simple workshop or continuing education credit course will be able to provide. As a graduate student, with my advanced training and repertoire of skills, I get that this is probably catered towards graduate students. However, if this material were presented in a way that allows for quicker learning, then teachers, school counselors, case managers, social workers, and others would be better prepared to take knowledge such as this and help those that they serve in their vocational journeys without needing the graduate education to do so. This would make these services not only more available, but also more accessible to populations that are not likely to pursue career counseling due to the associated costs. Now, the evidence base for this model. I think that it's doing fairly well overall, and I think that it reasonably demonstrates psychometric properties that suggest the information can be considered seriously. However, the outdated research base for this theory leaves room for improvement. Especially with the advancement of the social sciences in the last decade or two, I would be interested to see if any of Savickas' information changes with the newer and more demographically inclusive samples. By giving this theory a 4.3 out of 5, or 87%, or B+, depending on which rating resonates with you the most, I think that this fairly recognizes the theory's strengths, without also diminishing its room for improvement. Now, for those of you who would like to learn more about Savickas' work, or even just to check out some of the assessments and interview materials that he has put together, I have in this slide a brief collection of some of his more prominent works. Starting at the top of the slide and working my way down, some of the text resources I would encourage those interested in the career construction theory to pursue do include Supra's 1990 work, which can be purchased from the APA, from Elsevier's Journal of Vocational Behavior, and a couple of other sources. While this source is outdated, I think that it is valuable to understand the primary foundation of Savickas' work. And, speaking of Savickas, a 2019 published update to his 2002 career counseling publication is available for free as a PDF with a quick Google search, so this should go without saying, but please check out this resource. Savickas also has a personal website, wherein this 2019 resource, as well as a ton of others, can be found on his work related to career construction, as well as other works of his. In addition to these works, I would also encourage you all to investigate the National Career Development Association's website, as well as Elsevier. The NCDA and Elsevier's Journal of Vocational Behavior are likely to charge you for some of their resources, which is unfortunate, so I would recommend starting at Civicus's website and moving to the other two if you need further resources. These resources are great to have in mind, and really only represent the tip of the iceberg when it comes to potential resources for aspiring career counselors. But when it comes to this point in the presentation, I generally don't appreciate how many presenters just toss out some materials and hoping, that something sticks with their audiences. So in an attempt to make better on this, I want to point out some potential use cases for school counselors and community mental health centers, which is where I think that these resources are arguably best utilized. For school counselors, career style interviews, CSIs, could be implemented in group sessions with students. Career maturity inventories, CMIs, for high school students are also going to be useful in assisting improved vocational readiness. And really, I think that some of Civicus's developmental stages would fit neatly into most high school curriculums and would better prepare students to leave high school with a better idea of what they want to do in college. Not that Civicus's work does not have efficacy for college students, but I believe that these materials are better suited to be used in high schools, so the students can get a better idea of where they want their lives to go before college, since figuring out what you want to do while you're in college, or even after college, can be a very costly setback in one's life. Now, for community mental health centers, I think that counselors in these settings could reasonably integrate hero questions or early memory questions, such as those that I demonstrated earlier in this presentation, and others, to get a quick glimpse of a client's vocational ambitions during intakes and other interviews with their clients. Moreover, CMHCs also could consider providing NCDA accredited trainings that would allow clinicians a better idea of how to assist clients in reaching their vocational goals. Just as a formality, though, I would also like to add that for these additional resources, or even just to verify that their practices align with current research in the field, it may be beneficial for school counselors and CMHCs to check Elsevier's journal or other journals for updates to best practices in career counseling.